This is Clay in Dubuque. I wanted to make some thoughtful morning observations over a cup of coffee concerning this switch charge jack for RC aviation that's designed specifically for high voltage radio setups where you might be using a 2-cell LIFE, LiPo, whatever, and maybe high voltage servos require that, and you end up needing heavier gauge wire and just something quite distinct from the equipment that came supplied with radios when I got started in the hobby in the 1990s. Now, this was purchased off of Amazon by a friend, a student pilot, a friend of mine, and it's nice. I mean, look at this little lever over here. Keeps the dust out of that charge jack. And when you install a radio switch, the thing that's always on my mind is, am I going to hit a stick on my runway where there are woody weeds? Am I going to flick that switch off accidentally? Now, obviously, I orient it so something going toward the back of the aircraft will push it to the on position, but that's just a clever addition, a thoughtful addition by somebody that understood the hobby I'm entrenched in for 40 years. Now, here's something for me that I can't get past is, a friend accidentally confused this with an arming plug for a motor. And this is simply not designed for anything more than 12 volts. The switch isn't rated for anything more than 12 volts. And while it probably could, substitute for that, the spikes that come with even a 3-cell power system would put a pretty significant load on the contacts in the switch. So an arming switch, for my application anyway, is something that needs to be able to handle I would say at minimum 30 amps, for like a park flyer or a, 2-pound plane minimum. And of course I fly bigger things like the Senior Telemaster and soon a 12-foot Telemaster. But I think the thinking that I've really distilled myself to, at least in the corner, the little niche of the hobby that I enjoy so profoundly with sport flying, park flyers, giant scale electrics, having the additional point of failure of a receiver switch, in my experience, 40 years of doing this, I've had more crashes resulting from my mishandling, the pilot error of mishandling the charge of a receiver battery pack or all kinds of things related to it. I know that my best project ever, somehow a plug got disconnected when I looked at the crash debris field. And that should just not play into the equation. I have been flying a Senior Telemaster on 5 and now 6 cells since 2003 without one of these. It has a battery eliminator circuit made by Castle Creations, and it just plain eliminates a point of failure in the system for me and makes the whole issue of worrying about power to the radio causing a crash, takes that out of the equation. Now, granted, a BEC, a battery eliminator circuit, can be something that would fail. But in my experience, the thing that is most challenging with a BEC is whether it provides sufficient amperage for the application. So if I, let's say, put a BEC on my big motor glider, a Cularis by Multiplex with 6 servos, and I grabbed a $2 to $5 3-amp BEC from Hobby King and threw it in there, I'm really going to starve the servos of power in that moment, perhaps when I really need it. And I think, sometimes that whole issue gets overplayed. And in general, I would say that except for 3D acrobatics and things that really put a load on equipment, high-speed stuff, the ounces of torque requirement for sport flying are pretty modest compared to a lot of interest areas in RC aviation. So this got confused for a motor arming plug. I want to just recommend something. I believe it's MAXX Max and MPI who make a motor arming plug that uses the Robin Dean's Ultra plug, which, you know, are coming to a place of popularity. They've always been popular, but now you've got the military coming for them. You've got drone manufacturers, commercial operators, because those plugs can handle massive amperage. You know, I just read that an Anderson power pole plug that's used in these arming devices that I'm referring to, those things are rated at 370 amps. The Dean's, according to the folks that I quizzed, the Dean's Ultra plugs are really comfortable anywhere up to 135 amps. And that's just way past the requirements of any of my giant scale sport flying requirements. But it does bring up the issue that I think just ought to be known by any flyer. You know, this particular plug is called an XT60. And, you know, the Chinese do what they do to the American market, and I'll just leave it at that. But, you know, when you go and you dig for these manufacturers in China and you read the specs on that yellow plug, it's only rated for 30 amps. An XT90 is only rated for 45 amps. So whatever Chinese math they're doing, they're misrepresenting, or let's just call it false advertising. I would use Dean's Ultra plugs over XTs in a heartbeat. There's also a new XT90 that's got a anti-spark device built in. Brilliant. But I won't be using it. I'm gonna build my own do-it-yourself for my 6-cell applications, because I personally don't want to be patronizing China, and that's just my bias. So switch jacks, power jacks for radio systems, if it's buried and inaccessible in a plane, I think this type of device probably has a great application. But why would one not use a high quality battery eliminator circuit, you know, using switching to power their radio, knowing that, you know, a cell could go bad on a 6-cell pack and still power the radio all the way to the ground? I think that's eliminating a potential point of failure that, at least in my experience, I've crashed a lot of planes because of my mismanagement of receiver batteries and switches. So, no, I won't be using this as an arming switch, though maybe for some little 1-pound park flyer it would do the same job. But that's not the point. The point is that, you know, there's a reason to have an arming switch when you're flying an 11-pound senior telemaster with an 18-inch prop, as I am, and you're going to walk around that prop and, you know, perhaps getting in the prop arp in a way that could get you injured. So for my part, I'm going to stay away from radio charge jacks for a lot of empirical and some subjective reasons. This is Clay from Dubuque. Went a little longer than my usual. Have a great day.